A meaningless argument by the riverbank led to Peter Kelly's permanent absence. As night fell over Interstate Park, where the tranquil St. Croix River flows along the Wisconsin-Minnesota border, only the sound of insects and the gentle lapping of water against the shore remained. Peter Kelly, a devoted father of 5, came here to unwind after a long day. But what began as a minor dispute between two groups of fishermen quickly escalated, spiraling out of control. Insults were hurled across the water, defiant stares exchanged in the darkness, and then, in an instant, a knife flashed in the night. A fatal stab, a life cut short, and a controversial case began. What really happened that night? Was it a deliberate murder, or an act of self-defense driven by panic? Join us as we uncover this gripping story, where the line between justice and tragedy is thinner than ever. Interstate Park, spanning over 1,500 acres, stretches across the borders of Wisconsin and Minnesota. A vast expanse of natural beauty, it has long been a favorite destination for nature lovers, anglers, and those seeking a peaceful escape. On the afternoon of April 15, 2015, Peter Kelly and his close friend Ross Leckman arrived at the park, just as they had many times before. Fishing wasn't just a pastime for them, it was a rare opportunity to unwind after long hours of work. They selected a quiet spot by the riverbank, cast their lines, and waited in the stillness of nature. Across the St. Croix River, another group of young men had also gathered to fish. Their conversation was lively, filled with laughter and occasional bursts of loud, boisterous remarks. The river carried their voices across the water, making their chatter impossible to ignore. At first, Peter and Ross paid no attention, choosing to focus on their own enjoyment. But as the words grew cruder, more pointed, and laced with mockery, the atmosphere began to shift. Tension simmered beneath the surface as both groups started to feel provoked. What began as casual remarks soon escalated into aggressive taunts. Peter Kelly and Ross Leckman remained seated by the river, but they could hear everything. Every insult, every sneering remark from across the water echoed in the night air. The younger men didn't hold back, they were loud, unfiltered, and seemingly unafraid of consequences. As darkness settled over the park, their voices only grew harsher, their tone more abrasive. Peter and Ross didn't react immediately. They continued to fish, trying to tune out the noise, but then, one comment crossed the line. It was a remark that couldn't be ignored. They shouted back. One insult led to another. Then another. Soon, no one cared about fishing anymore. What had started as two groups of strangers had transformed into two opposing sides, locked in a brewing confrontation, but distance wouldn't keep them apart for long. When the young men across the river continued their taunts, Peter and Ross exchanged a glance, and then, they stood up. The car rolled slowly across the US 8 bridge, passing through the quiet streets of St. Croix. Peter Kelly and Ross Leckman were no longer just two men out for a peaceful night of fishing. Their anger had ignited, pushing them beyond the limits of reason. They no longer questioned whether this confrontation was worth it, they only knew they wouldn't let the young men get away without a response. The headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, while darkness swallowed everything beyond their reach. As they pulled into the parking lot on the other side, Peter stopped the car 100 to 150 yards away from the group of young men, far enough to avoid immediate detection. The engine cut off. They sat in silence, watching. The group was no longer 10 or 15 strong, only 4 young men stood near their vehicle. This was their moment. Peter and Ross opened the car doors and stepped out. Darkness cloaked the campsite, broken only by the dim glow from the parking lot casting shadows across the figures moving in silence. Peter Kelly and Ross Leckman advanced, their footsteps steady, their eyes burning with fury. Across from them, the 4 young men remained unmoved, not afraid, not backing down. The taunts continued. Sharp words, cutting like invisible blades, severing any chance of de-escalation. Breathing grew heavy. Eyes locked in a tension so tight it felt ready to snap. Ross Leckman lost patience. He lunged forward, shoving Levi Aker Kendall to the ground. Levi panicked. He scrambled up, hands shaking as he reached into his pocket. In the chaos, his fingers found the first thing they touched, a pocket knife. The night seemed to shatter as Levi Aker Kendall sprang to his feet, the knife clenched in his fist. His breath was ragged, his heart pounding like a drumbeat of terror. Instinctively, he backed away. At 9:45 p.m., a frantic 911 call came through. The voice on the other end was broken, rushed, and filled with ragged breaths. When officers arrived, their patrol car's headlights illuminated a scene of chaos, a seemingly quiet parking lot, yet evidence of violence was everywhere. Peter Kelly's car remained parked, but its rear window had been shattered, and shards of glass lay scattered across the ground. Just a few feet away, a dark crimson trail of blood stretched from where Peter had collapsed to the spot where the young men had parked before disappearing into the night. Drops of blood stained the gravel, leading investigators deeper into the nightmare that had unfolded near the campsite. Hidden among the trees, a backpack had been left behind, partially buried beneath dry leaves. When officers searched it, they discovered personal belongings and a small bag of marijuana inside. Amidst the disarray at the crime scene, investigators noticed a piece of paper blown to the side of the road. It was a receipt from Walmart. The faded print on it revealed that it had been issued 3 days prior for the purchase of a fishing license. Following the lead, police traced it back to a teenager in Isanti, Minnesota, a 45-minute drive from the crime scene. When questioned, the teenager revealed that he had not been at the park the night of the murder, but he knew the group of young men who frequently spent time there. More importantly, he knew about a dog named Gunner, a crucial detail that matched a witness statement. This small clue quickly connected the missing pieces. The group of young men was finally identified. Once they were identified, news of the case spread rapidly. With the weight of the investigation closing in, those involved could no longer stay silent. Just days after the murder, a lawyer contacted police. His client, 19-year-old Levi Aker Kendall, admitted to stabbing Peter Kelly that fateful night. Shortly after, Levi's mother appeared at the police station. She brought with her 2 crucial pieces of evidence: the clothes Levi had worn the night of the killing and the deadly pocketknife. Blood still stained the fabric and the blade, undeniable proof of what had happened. With solid evidence in hand, police no longer had any doubts. Levi Aker Kendall was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The 19-year-old, who had planned to spend the evening fishing with his friends, now faced a dark and uncertain future. Peter Kelly surged forward, his arm swinging, but in a flash, the blade plunged into his chest. The movement was so fast, so sudden, that no one realized what had happened. Peter froze, his eyes wide, his breath stuttering. Blood seeped through his shirt, spilling down his abdomen. Survival instinct took over. He turned and ran, stumbling a few steps before his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the ground, fingers trembling as they clawed at the cold gravel. Ross Leckman was in a frenzy, rushing to his friend's side. He reached for his phone, but it wasn't there. Both phones were in the car, and Peter was dying in front of him. There was no time to think. In sheer desperation, Ross grabbed a wooden post nearby and slammed it into the car window. Glass exploded. Blood, shards, panic, all of it fused into the night. He reached through the wreckage, grabbed the phone, and with trembling fingers, dialed emergency services. The case of Levi Aker Kendall quickly captured public attention. A 19-year-old boy had stabbed and killed a family man. Was it self-defense or murder? Prosecutors accused Levi of using a deadly weapon in an unnecessary confrontation. According to them, stabbing Peter Kelly directly in the heart was not an accident. It was a reckless act that showed a disregard for human life. They emphasized that Peter was unarmed, only using his bare hands, and that Levi had multiple ways to escape the situation without resorting to a knife. But Levi's defense team argued that he was not the aggressor, he was just a teenager backed into a corner. They cited Wisconsin's Castle Doctrine, a law that allows individuals to use deadly force in self-defense when attacked in their home or vehicle. Levi had been inside the car when Peter Kelly rushed in and pulled him out. In that moment of panic, Levi drew his knife to protect himself. The witnesses that night, Ross Leckman and Levi's 3 friends, gave statements that were similar but conflicting. Ross admitted that he had shoved Levi to the ground, but insisted that Levi had pulled out the knife immediately afterward, before the fight became truly dangerous. On the other hand, Levi's friends described a different scenario. They claimed that Peter Kelly had charged at Levi, dragging him out of the car in a tense struggle. In a state of panic, Levi unintentionally swung the knife while being pulled, and the blade accidentally pierced Peter's chest. Forensic evidence, however, complicated the case further. The medical examiner determined that the knife had entered Peter Kelly's heart at an upward angle, moving from left to right. This contradicted Levi's claim that he had been pulled down and had swung his knife blindly. Prosecutors argued that this was proof that Levi had deliberately thrust the blade upward, intending to kill. The defense quickly countered. They pointed out that in moments of panic, the trajectory of a stab wound does not always reflect intent. They also noted that Peter Kelly's blood alcohol level was 0.043, not high enough to be legally intoxicated, but possibly enough to impair his judgment. Another crucial detail puzzled the jury: Levi and his friends never called 911. Instead, they fled the scene, discarding a backpack containing marijuana along the way. Prosecutors argued that this was the behavior of a guilty person trying to cover up evidence. The defense pushed back, saying that Levi was simply scared and didn't know what to do, just like any other 19-year-old in a horrifying situation. After 17 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: not guilty. Levi Aker Kendall was acquitted of all murder charges. Peter Kelly's family sat in shock and disbelief. They could not comprehend how the man who had killed their husband and father could walk out of court without facing any punishment. After the trial, the Kelly family released a heartbreaking statement: "The justice system has failed us. We lost a husband and a father, but no one is being held accountable for his death." A peaceful evening on the St. Croix River ended in tragedy. A man lay motionless on the cold ground, his last breath swallowed by the darkness, leaving behind a wife and 5 young children who had no idea what had just happened. Not far away, a 19-year-old boy stood trembling, a blood-stained knife in his hand, his eyes wide with horror. And when everything was said and done, only questions remained, echoing in everyone's mind: was this self-defense or murder? Had justice been served, or had a life been stolen with no one held accountable? Peter Kelly's family never received a satisfactory answer. His wife, Christy Kelly, had carried the burden alone since the day she learned her husband had been killed. Her 5 young children had suddenly lost the father who had worked tirelessly for them, waking up before dawn and staying up late to provide, to guide, to protect. They were too young to fully grasp the tragedy, but old enough to feel the emptiness in their home. For them, the trial was a cruel joke. Levi Aker Kendall walked out of the courtroom a free man, while they had lost someone forever. Christy once said, "If you can afford a good lawyer, you can kill a man and never have to take responsibility." That was not the justice she had hoped for, but was Levi truly free? He may never see the inside of a prison cell, but he would carry a life sentence in his own mind, one no court could set him free from. Once an ordinary teenager, his life would forever be tied to the death of another man. Whether he liked it or not, every time he closed his eyes, he would see that night all over again: the darkness, the shouting, the flash of a blade, and Peter Kelly collapsing to his knees. The public would not easily forget this case. Many believed the jury's verdict had set a dangerous precedent, that anyone could now pull out a knife in an argument, kill someone, and later claim self-defense to walk free. Others argued that Levi had simply been a young man backed into a corner, that he had panicked, that this was never an intentional murder, but no matter how one looked at it, the truth remained the same. A man was dead, a family had lost its provider, and nothing could bring Peter Kelly back. What happened on the night of April 15, 2015, was not just a fight that ended in death, it was a lesson in how anger, pride, and a single moment of poor judgment can destroy lives. If Peter Kelly and Ross Leckman had never driven across the river, if Levi Aker Kendall had never carried a knife in his pocket, if just one of them had walked away, everything might have been different. The case may be closed, but the wounds it left behind remain. A man lies forever by the banks of the St. Croix River, a family shattered, 5 children growing up without a father. Peter Kelly died in an unnecessary confrontation, a sudden burst of anger that took everything away. On the other side, Levi Aker Kendall walked out of the courtroom a free man, but was he truly free? The shadow of that night will follow him forever, a reminder that, even though the court declared him not guilty, he is still the one who took a life. Every stare, every whisper behind his back will serve as an invisible sentence, one he can never escape. The case of Peter Kelly serves as a warning. In a moment of anger, one wrong decision can change everything. A small argument can turn deadly. And when it does, there is no going back. Only pain, and consequences that can never be erased.